So is this your first time here? You probably clicked on this because you saw the thumbnail and it said supervolcanoes versus climate change, and you thought, ooh, that sounds dramatic. Maybe one of those things is worse than the other. And you're in for a wild ride because the truth is both are terrible. But at least one of them is kind of exciting. The world is full of scary shit, and there's been a lot of it happening lately. Most of it has to do with people being jerks or nature doing its thing, like that whole scorched earth thing that humans have been doing for the past 12,000 years. Now, there are lots of problems facing our species right now. There's an actual plague of locusts in Africa, which is bad news if you don't happen to be a god who made Moses into a plague-inflicting badass. Also, we're pretty sure the world is going to end in about 4 billion years when the sun expands and swallows the earth. But aside from these minor inconveniences, there are still some uniquely modern threats that we face today. Two of the most looming among them are supervolcanoes and climate change. So let's talk about how they stack up. First off, let's get something out of the way. Supervolcanoes are not the same as climate change. They're different phenomena caused by different things. One is a volcanic eruption that is really big. The other is a gradual change in the average weather patterns of the entire planet. You can't really compare them to each other any more than you could compare, say, a stroke to a heart attack. Sure, they're both medical things, but the causes and effects are just too different to make any kind of meaningful comparison. So the point of this video isn't to figure out which is worse, but rather to explore the effects of each individually, because just talking about the size of one doesn't tell us much. You can't say that one is worse than the other without explaining why, and you can't really explain why without talking about the effects of each. So let's do that. First up, supervolcanoes. The stuff of nightmares. Supervolcanoes are so large that their eruptions reset entire ecosystems, wiping out many species and causing major changes to the global climate for years. We don't mean the Ring of Fire kind of volcanoes. Those are baby stuff. A supervolcanic eruption is at least 1,000 times larger than that. For some scale, Mount St. Helens blew about 6 cubic kilometers of material during its famous 1980 eruption. That was considered a huge deal. But even that was only a tenth of what it would take to make it a supervolcano. It'd take about 600 of those eruptions to equal one super-eruption. To date, there have only been 3 known supervolcanic eruptions in the past 2 million years. The oldest was in the Middle East, about 750,000 years ago. Another happened in what is now Indonesia about 30,000 years ago. And the most recent was in North America about 23,000 years ago. Not coincidentally, all 3 seem to have had devastating consequences for human evolution. Each one seems to have wiped out most of the humans that were alive at the time, leaving only a few dozen surviving populations, which then repopulated the world after the dust settled. And speaking of dust, that's one of the major ways that supervolcanoes affect the world. During the eruption, tons of ash, gas, and aerosols are released into the atmosphere. This blocks sunlight and creates an ice age effect that lasts for years or even decades. In 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted and sent 51 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the air. That wasn't even a supervolcano eruption, but it led to the year without a summer in 1816. Imagine that, but times 1,000 and you'll get an idea of what a supervolcanic eruption might be like. Obviously that's not good for farming or, photosynthesis, which plants need to survive. Global cooling from volcanic eruptions can also disrupt weather patterns and cause droughts, floods, and storms depending on where you live. But after the initial explosion, there's also the aftermath. When the volcano settles, the land around it is changed forever. Large parts of it are usually rendered completely lifeless and uninhabitable, turning what was once a fertile area into a desert. And then there are lahars, which are volcanic mudslides made of pulverized rock and water. They can travel really far, destroying everything in their path. And finally, there's the long game. Over millions of years, the soil becomes enriched with volcanic ash and minerals, and over time becomes some of the most fertile land on the planet. It's a long process, though. In general, no one wants to live near a volcano. especially one that's super. Now, climate change, on the other hand, is much more insidious. Unlike a volcanic eruption, which is a one-off event that lasts a few days, climate change is a gradual shift in temperature and weather patterns that happens over hundreds or thousands of years. It's already happening, but the effects will be felt for centuries or millennia. One of the biggest problems with climate change is that it's hard to predict what will happen. We know that temperatures are rising and that the polar ice caps are melting, which will eventually lead to higher sea levels. But beyond that, things get complicated. Some regions will become drier and others will become wetter. Some areas will be hit harder by storms and others by heat waves. Rising sea levels will displace millions of people who live along coastlines. But again, the details are still murky. We know that there will be a lot of upheaval, but exactly where and how much is hard to say. What's more, unlike with supervolcanoes, there are tons of variables that can affect how bad things will get. How quickly do we reduce our emissions? How well do we develop new technologies? What do other species do? As you can see, there's a lot that goes into predicting the future of climate change, which makes it harder to pin down the exact effects. Because we can't know for sure how bad things will get, it's easy to fall into the trap of thinking it won't happen. After all, what's the worst that could happen? And that's the scary part. The worst that could happen with climate change is that we keep doing what we're doing now and find out the hard way. So which one is worse? Well, obviously, we think that the lesser of two evils is the one that we should focus on, whatever that may be. But the truth is, both suck. It's hard to compare them because they're so different, yet they're both driven by human activity. In the case of supervolcanoes, we haven't directly caused any, but we did play a role in the ones that happened during our evolution. Human activity increased the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, leading to higher temperatures, which dried out the landscape and made it easier for magma to come to the surface. On top of that, low genetic diversity makes us more susceptible to diseases and environmental changes. Without those events, humans might have evolved differently, possibly with larger brains or stronger resistance to illness. But because of them, we became the ultra-adaptable, fast-breeding species that we are today. As for climate change, well, that's entirely on us. Humans burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests have caused temperatures to rise over the past 100 years, and the effects of that will be felt for centuries. Right now, climate change is having a relatively small effect on the course of human history. But as temperatures continue to rise, we will feel the effects more and more. Even if we switch to cleaner energy sources and reduce our carbon footprint, the damage is already done. And that means that life on Earth will never be the same. We think that the lesson here is that we shouldn't mess with either of these things. Just stay away from giant volcanoes and don't burn down the planet. Easier said than done. We hope that you learned something today. We know that you'll want to stay tuned for more updates, because we have tons of awesome videos in the works.